there's trillions of dollars being deployed to upgrade the grid. It's a national security issue to make sure that it is taken care of. And POW is the only pure play on that. If you look at look under the hood at any of the other products out there, you're going to see companies like Microsoft and, some random companies, or you're going to see an overconcentration in big utility companies. That's not what you want. You want the companies that are building the components to upgrade the grid. That's where the money's going. That's where the profits are. And that's where we're focused.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Dividend Stockpile. We're here again today with Adam Patti, CEO of VistaShares, to talk about one of their brand new ETFs, POW, the VistaShares Electrification Supercycle ETF. It offers investors a strategic avenue to participate in the electrification supercycle that is reshaping industries worldwide. So, Adam, welcome to the channel.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Welcome back. Thank you so much for coming on. I always love our conversations about your guys' innovative products. And this one, POW, is one of those that is just, a perfect fit for the environment we're in today. So get into it. Let's talk about POW. What's it all about?
So, everyone talks about all the CapEx being deployed into the AI infrastructure space, right? And we have an ETF for that, AIS, which has done exceedingly well. So when people are investing into AI infrastructure, what they're investing into actually is the building of data centers and semiconductors, right? And the issue, though, is these data centers, they need a lot of power, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, 20 years ago, data centers, were much smaller. They weren't sucking up the grid as much as they are now. But now some of these data centers that are being built out are, they're using the same amount of power as some small cities. Mm-hmm. So imagine when dozens of these things get online, you've got dozens of new small cities that, need to be powered. And what's going on is that, as you may know, is, the grid in the United States in many cases is 40 years old. It can't even currently satiate the needs of consumers currently, right? During the summer, you see all the brownouts in California, mm-hmm. just from air conditioning and electric cars, right? And, as we move forward, putting aside data centers and AI, just all the electric cars and all the digital devices that are being plugged in now, it's we need to upgrade the grid. And frankly, it's a national security risk in the United States, right? Putting aside even the lack of capability on the grid, but it's the cybersecurity. It's making sure it's hardened against EMPs, God forbid. So there's just a lot that needs to happen there. But what's going on, with the AI data centers is that demand is going up 10, 20x on the grid. And without that additional power ability, AI just doesn't work. Yep. So that's what electrification is all about. It's about ensuring that, not only do we have the generation capabilities, which I can talk more about, which we actually do, what we don't have is the ability to transmit and distribute that power. So the United States does not have an energy problem. We have a power problem. And that's really the distinction here and why we've, how we've constructed this portfolio to, capitalize on that.
That's great. So electrification, runs everything. So you can't have the data centers. You can't have the high tech that we have. You can't have electric cars. You can't have any of this if you don't have the power. So focusing on investments in that electrification space makes a lot of sense. And that's why you guys call it a super cycle. So can you define what you consider a super cycle to actually be?
Yeah. So my partner, John McNeil, he's the co-founder of VistaShares. He's a lot more eloquent in talking about it, but this is partly why he wanted to get into the ETF space is he sees, what a super cycle is a long-term technology-driven disruptive trend that changes the way people live and work. Right. So if you go back in time, there's never been a time in the ever in the history that we know of where there's been more than one super cycle occurring at the same time. So the last super cycle was the internet. Right. So that was certainly disruptive, changed the way everyone lives and works and, continuing today. But now we're in a very interesting time in the economy where there are multiple super cycles occurring at the same time. So we've got AI, which of course is a massive one. We've got electrification. We've got robotics. We've got biotech. We've got even space. These are all disruptive trends that are really changing the global economy. So that's how we define super cycles. So when we look at product development, what we're trying to do is get ahead of that and really identify, not only what are the super cycles, but where is the CapEx going to make that happen. So, when, for instance, just taking AI, for instance, the reason, John was on CNBC and he was talking to Joe Kernan, and Joe said, well, and they were talking about AI because John, just to back up, John was the president of Tesla. He was the chief operating officer of Lyft. He's on the board of General Motors. He's vice chairman of their autonomous vehicle subsidiary. He's an AI guru and an electrification guru. And he said, well, to Joe Kernan, well, there's got to be an AI ETF. You can get good exposure to that space. And lo and behold, you go and look at the ETFs out there and, they're called AI, but they're not. They're Mag 7 plus, most of them, not all of them, but most of them. So, he tried to come up with a better way to design exposure. How do you get actual pure exposure to the theme? So we came up with this bill of materials concept that we filed a patent on, where we analyze the supply chain, try to determine, what are the different components going into, for instance, building out an AI data center, or in the case of POW, our new ETF, electrification, building out these transmission and distribution lines. What are all the components? Then you layer over the bill of materials to see how important each segment of the supply chain is, because it's nice to know that, for instance, in AI data centers, that you need cooling systems, but how important is it? So in fact, just as an example, that's 30% of the cost of an AI data center. So, so it's where the money's going. And then equally important is where the CapEx spending is going, right? So again, we know that in AI, it's data centers and semiconductors. In electrification, we can get more into this, but over 50% of the CapEx and the forecasted CapEx, which is in the trillions, is going to distribution and transmission. Everyone talks about generation. It's sexy, it's hot, micronuclear and renewables. And yeah, that's a piece of it, but actually it's a small piece. And that's what POW is trying to really harness, is where the CapEx is going, A, and then B, which companies within the supply chain are actually getting that money.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the companies that you do have in it, since we're talking about like the whole supply chain. So what are some of the top holdings in this one?
Well, our top holding is Delta Electronics, which is a very interesting company. And, they are focused on switching equipment and transmission lines and kind of all the nuts and bolts that go into, again, building out the transmission and distribution. And just to back up, what that means is, once energy is generated, it needs to go somewhere, right? It needs to be transmitted to a location, right? So that's the long haul, right? The transmission piece is the long haul going to a locale before it gets to the consumer or gets to an AI data center. Then there's distribution, which is the distributing it to the actual end consumer. So, these are, this is the cabling, and this is, all of that stuff that nobody really pays attention to. But without it, you just simply can't upgrade the grid. And this is the leader in the space. And, so if you look at our portfolio, there's a lot of companies, most companies, probably most people have never heard of. There's one company, our top 10, GE Vernova, which people have certainly heard of, or many people have. That is actually the only overlapping holding between AIS and POW. And what GE Vernova does, and this was actually when we added it into AIS 7 months ago, because Sonny Madra, who's the president of a company called Grok, GROQ, one of the leaders in AI inference, he recognized that a lot of the AI data centers were looking to build their own power generation facilities because they couldn't access the power. So they had plenty of natural gas to run the facilities. They didn't have the turbines to do it. GE Vernova, among other things, is the leader in developing those. So, it's those kind of industrial plays and that's where again, the CapEx is going. That's where the profits are going. Some of the other companies in here, Prysmian, it's another company, which is, it's an Italian company. Again, nuts and bolts, the switching equipment and all of that stuff that needs to be built in order to, to make energy into power and get that power to the consumer.
Yeah. And again, that's what I really like about it, is you guys are looking at the entire process, not just the end ones or the most popular names that everyone's already invested in, S&P 500, things like that. Just a side note, my number one holding, my favorite, is GE Vernova. So I really like to see that there. I think they have a huge runway ahead of them. And to your point, they are in the center of all this build out of the AI and as well as the electrification cycle. But you do have a lot of other really good companies in here as well. Some that dividend investors might know is Eaton Corp. is really popular. Siemens Energy, which Siemens has been a long time dividend payer. Siemens Energy does not pay a dividend yet, but I think they're expecting to later this month announce their first dividend. So that's pretty cool. So it's nice to see one, unique names in here, and two, international names. You're not just focus on US developers and things like that. So it gives you a little bit even more diversification than you would in your traditional US centric ETFs that you see out there.
Yeah, and that's the key, right? We want to provide those unique exposures. I mean, most people couldn't buy Prismian SPA because it's a local security on the Italian stock exchange. So, we're going through the effort of getting that into the portfolio. So, and it's not in the S&P 500 clearly, and it's not being held by most investors. So we're trying to provide that unique exposure to avoid that over concentration, overlapping securities that people are buying. I mean, most people don't understand, more people are starting to understand, but 40 to 45% of the S&P 500 is in the top 10 holdings. The same top 10 holdings, nearly, I think the overlap is 8 out of the 10, are the same in the NASDAQ, and it's about 45% of the NASDAQ, the QQQ. So, when you're buying these two core index funds, thinking you're getting getting diversification, you actually have no diversification or very little. So, we're trying to, every product we launch, it's a diversifier. It's hopefully giving you exposure that you just simply don't have.
Yeah, as I was mentioning offline, this goes into my thematic bucket. So I have 4 themes that I focus on, which is similar to your super cycles. One of them is electrification. So I have this ETF in that. And so that really hits the sweet spot when it comes to focusing on particular areas of the market that you feel are going to be the next up and coming for the next decade or two. Let's talk a little bit more about the details of POW. So it was just started about 3 weeks ago, so October 28th. So pretty new holding. I see you guys have done a little over $3 million in asset raise, which is a very good start for just a couple of weeks. Can you tell me a little bit about the number of holdings and what the approach to is when it comes to adding or taking out certain names?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's been a rough 3 weeks in the market to launch a new product, particularly an equity growth fund. But we've gotten a great response. So we're really excited about it. Yeah, there's about 60 holdings in there right now. And it is a new fund. However, the methodology is identical to AIS. And AIS has been, it's going on its 1-year anniversary in the beginning of December. It's been the top performing AI ETF in the marketplace. Again, no surprise, because again, it's where the cash is being deployed. So very simply, in terms of construction, we have our patent pending methodology, our bill of materials methodology, which is right on our website. So anyone can go there and say, all right, why is XYZ company in the portfolio? And you can see through the methodology why it's there. So all of our ETFs are active to a rules-based process. So we like the hybrid approach. So what POW is, the core of the portfolio is 100% run on this bill of materials process. It's rules-based. So what we're doing again is we're looking at across the ecosystem of energy. First thing we're doing is we're mapping out where the CapEx spending is going. So as I mentioned earlier, about 50% is in transmission and distribution. So we're mapping out where the CapEx is going. And then what we do is we start analyzing the supply chains for each one of those segments, mapping out the components within the supply chain. That's when we put over the bill of materials. So, for transmission lines, for instance, what are the different components that go into building that out? It's the cabling, it's the switching equipment, and so forth. We want to know, how important is cabling? Is cabling 10% of the total cost or 20%? We nail all that down. Once we do that, we're mapping the companies to each segment. Then that's where the hard work comes in, where we actually start analyzing the companies, looking at their financials, how much of their business is actually being run within this segment. Just because you're in the cabling business doesn't mean you're in the cabling business for electrification, grid upgrades, and things like that. You could be doing something else. So we want to know if they're relevant companies. Then we create the core portfolio from that with the most relevant companies. And we rebalance that portion of the portfolio twice a year, at the end of June and the end of December. So that's the core portfolio. The magic of it, though, is the active component. So, we believe that in fast moving industries like AI or electrification, you need expertise. And, it's not necessarily Wall Street analyst expertise who can crunch numbers. We can crunch numbers too. We choose to build our investment committee differently. We use what we call practitioners and then the portfolio construction people. So on the portfolio construction side, it's me and Professor Robert Whitelaw, who's the former dean of NYU Stern School of Business and chairman of the finance department. He's a world-renowned expert in portfolio construction. So that's all well and good, but it's really the practitioners that make the difference. So on POW, we've got John McNeil. Again, I already talked about his background. He's a guru in electrification and AI. We've got Sunny Madra, runs one of the most important AI companies in the world, and also is fully versed in the electrification and the power grid, because it all works together. And then we added this guy, Justin Lopas, who he was a senior engineer at SpaceX. He ran manufacturing for Anduril. Now he's the chief operating officer and co-founder of a company called Base Power, which is one of the leaders in energy technology around the world. So he is, an absolute guru in this space. So their job is to oversee the portfolio and identify risks and opportunities. So we're not waking up in the morning and saying, oh, this stock is down 10%, let's buy it. That's not what we do. We're looking at, risks and opportunities. Has there been a fundamental change in technologies? Has a company's pipeline been decimated or growing because of it? Things like that. And we want to know that from firsthand experience of people who are building these facilities and involved with upgrading the grid, because they know a lot better than your average Wall Street analyst who's just looking at backward information or interviewing, management, 3 months after the fact. So once they identify a risk and opportunity, then it goes over to the portfolio construction people, myself and Professor Whitelaw, to express their view into the portfolio.
That's awesome. And that's definitely one of the benefits of an active approach as opposed to a passive approach. You can get an index, targeting some of these industries or focus areas, but you're not going to get that personal knowledge and that insight that you can do with an active manager. All right, so thank you so much for giving all the information about POW, the VistaShares Electrification Supercycle ETF. It looks like it's a really great approach. You guys have a lot of knowledge and experience behind who's running the program. You have a good plan when it comes to the strategy. If you could give someone like an elevator speech or quick summary of why POW, what would you say to someone?
There's trillions of dollars being deployed to upgrade the grid. It's a national security issue to make sure that it is taken care of, and POW is the only pure play on that. If you look at any, look under the hood at any of the other products out there, you're going to see companies like Microsoft and some random companies, or you're going to see an overconcentration in big utility companies. That's not what you want. You want the companies that are building the components to upgrade the grid. That's where the money's going. That's where the profits are, and that's where we're focused.
That's great. Really appreciate that. Where can people find more information about POW as well as your other ETFs?
Sure. Go on our website, VistaShares.com. We're on X. We're on LinkedIn, but we have a white paper that's being published on POW over the next few weeks. But we've got a great investment case right on our website. So you can pull it right down. It goes through the whole, the whole story of why and how. And that's really, I think, the most important for investors to really dig in and understand the dynamics of the industry.
That's awesome. I'll definitely make sure I put a link to the investment case as well as all the information. All right. So Adam, really appreciate your time. We're talking about POW, the VistaShares Electrification Supercycle ETF. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. While you're here, check out this next video to learn more about dividends, income investing, and option selling. And while you're here, make sure you subscribe. Click the like button. It really does help. Thanks.